RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast, where we build machines.
Today's episode is sponsored by Optimum Nutrition. To get a 40% discount across their entire batch-tested range, use the code RENEGADE40 at www.onacademy.co.uk/elite portal. And of course, members of the Rugby Renegade online subscription program get an exclusive 50% discount plus free access to the Optimum Nutrition online nutrition course. Hello and welcome back to episode 70 of the Rugby Renegade Podcast. My name is Jamie Bain and today I interview Peter Tierney, formerly Sport Scientist with Leinster Rugby over in Ireland and currently working with the FA, with the women's team. It was great to chat to Peter. Unfortunately, we had a few Wi-Fi issues, so it might be quite heavily edited, but hopefully it makes good sense and there's tons of great nuggets of information. So give it a listen and let us know what you think. Peter, welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. It's great to have you on. Let's start by you telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into strength and conditioning and who you've worked with.
Cheers, Jamie. I think even before my background, I've got, I guess, a pretty curious nature or mindset. So that might be one of the reasons that I'm in this industry. Definitely have like an urge to kind of evolve and share and learn. And also a level of empathy or caring, and I probably get that from family. So a couple of those things that probably fit together in terms of my character, which might tee up my kind of experience nicely. Even the kind of evolution part, the current CEO of the FA, Mark Bullingham, he I remember a sort of a nice quote that he said in my first couple of months in my current role, and he said the past is for reference, not residence, and I thought that really resonated with me in terms of kind of, I guess the evolution side of things. In terms of experience, decided to do an undergraduate degree in health and performance science in college in Dublin. During that, myself and one of my best mates, Greg, we were coaching rugby at schools level, and then kind of transitioned to coaching S&C alongside our course, which gave us plenty of opportunity to try apply some of the things that we learned in the course, but also plenty of opportunity to make mistakes. And then in the final year of that degree, was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to intern at the high performance gym in UCD with a group of elite swimmers under the guidance of George Petrakos. He's someone who I still consider a really good friend and mentor, and he's someone who helped me out loads when I was really young starting off, so helped guide me kind of early days. Off the back of that, and after the final year of the college degree, interviewed for an interim position in Leinster. So I remember getting a question, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? And probably cheekily said, sitting on the other side of this desk. It wasn't meant to be cheeky. It was definitely an aspiration. And I think, that type of thing might rub somebody up the wrong way. But Dan Tobin was one of the guys on the other side of the desk. So something, obviously, throughout that interview made him and others in Leinster decided to give me an opportunity. He gave me loads of ownership and trusted me when I was really young, starting off in the industry. I was only 20 when I first started coming into Leinster. I made tons of mistakes and stuff, but gave me like a level of autonomy to work with, obviously under his guidance, but it was a really good learning experience for me with some of my other colleagues there as well. And then kind of throughout the first year or two in Leinster as well, obviously was keen on coaching more, so continued to coach in my old school, did some S&C with the senior rugby team and hockey team, and then also at a club level rugby as well. So I spent 5 years at Leinster, just over, and had Dan as a head of performance and a mentor, and then Charlie Higgins came in and himself and Dan are very different, but both really good mentors, good leaders, but in very different ways. But I mean, I feel lucky and fortunate that I got to work under two different styles of leadership, both at different skills, which helped me in different ways. But I mean, I feel like I benefited from both of them enormously, and I don't think I'd be in a position that I'm in now without either of them, along with other people as well, but not to list off everybody. And then now find myself at the FA, working in football. So again, find myself really lucky to work with like a really unique group of people, from different sports, different backgrounds, different experiences, kind of under the guidance of our head of department, Bryce Kavanagh. I think he and everyone at the FA have done a really good job of actually recruiting a group of people in our department who are diverse, who are not afraid to challenge each other. I've had some brilliant discussions with some of my colleagues even through this kind of period, and we're happy to challenge and to be challenged, and I think it's a really, really good place. Feels like a really good environment. And then kind of alongside that, I've always tried to continue my education throughout my career. So I guess one of the things we did back in Leinster was around trying to answer the questions or kind of provide solutions to the problems that we were working that we came across in work. And I know a lot of the staff have done some like masters or PhDs as well, and that was really good because I guess the research we were doing had a genuine application to the work we were doing, or it informed our practice massively. So to be able to blend the two of those, and I still am finishing the PhD myself, that's been a really nice process for me, because it's forced me, I guess, to think in sort of different domains, but to come out as hopefully a balanced practitioner.
Now, one of your Twitter posts recently, which is something that's caused a bit of, I guess not controversy, probably a bit strong, but about Bowden Barrett's Bronco record he set returning to training. And you spoke a bit about and started looking at maximum aerobic speed and high speed running. Do you want to kind of talk about what you were sharing there?
Yeah, I hope it didn't cause any controversy. Look, I just saw the Auckland Blues posting Bowden Barrett's score. It just sparked an interest, I guess, and just probably connected some dots in my head that I hadn't connected before. Not that I hadn't connected, but I always think chatting to people or seeing other things kind of asks different questions, and then helps me think slightly differently or think of things that I haven't really thought about. But it's just a really good time. I've seen sometimes very close to that, and under 4 minutes 20, I consider definitely very good. But yeah, it just sparks some thoughts. And one thing that we briefly looked at before was like looking at what did better or fitter players do in the weeks preceding the time that we tested them. So with the backs in that little sample that I shared out, that was just high speed running distance accumulated in the 3 weeks prior to the fitness test. But again, I think like that could be a very much a chicken and egg type scenario. So does the high speed running they accumulate help them produce a better fitness score, or do fitter players just cover more high speed running? And that might have no input from an S&C coach, and that might just be how they train. And I guess the other thing as well to mention is that that is our environment specific, and it could be training specific to how we trained in that couple of weeks before. Wasn't evident with forwards, so there's a few other probably more questions I have after thinking about that kind of thing than answers for anybody. But I think look, MAS as a measure of aerobic ability is a good snapshot for team sports and rugby. I don't think it captures every single physical quality that's important, but as a foundational quality that underpins a lot of recovery between other high intensity efforts or in between training sessions and matches, I think it's a really important quality for us to get a snapshot into. And obviously that depends on when you do it in the season and stuff, but if you can get a snapshot a couple of times, I think it's really, really useful information for S&C coaches to have.
Yeah, and I guess all tests really are, a general snapshot of that individual capacity, but it can guide what we're doing. And how would you go about testing for aerobic ability and to train for it as well?
Yeah, I've used a couple of different tests. Again, these are probably environment specific, but I've used yo-yo in the past, level 1 and 2. The Bronco. I've used a 1 kilometre time trial in rugby and now in football. And look, I know there's other ones, 30-15 and everything else. So there's tons of ways for you to measure. I think for me the important things are that the test is as valid and reliable, but obviously feasible as well. So I think that's a factor that's of equal importance to its validity and reliability. Look, you could develop a 60-70 minute test that's valid and reliable for fitness, but I mean, how feasible is that through a sporting season or a pre-season or at any time point? So I think it's something we discuss in work currently at the moment in terms of like time limitation and fitness testing or strength profiling. I think it's important that we don't want to detract from or take away from the sport or training itself. So if our physical testing, fitness testing can go alongside the team sport and training, I think that definitely helps. In terms of training MAS, like I think when people hear MAS, like I think of it as the measure of fitness, aerobic fitness, but I think people associate it all the time with MAS intervals. MAS intervals are one method of developing aerobic running fitness. There's tempo running. There's tons of other things that I certainly won't get into detail, but I mean, probably the question that I have is what about your sport? Don't think we can forget that a well-planned training session with appropriate rest and recovery times over a couple of weeks, whether that's pre-season or in season, that will help develop aerobic fitness, but also it has the added benefit of challenging technical skill and decision making under high fatigue. So my training point for here anyway would be don't forget about rugby. That's probably the best place.
Yeah, definitely. And have you your time at Leinster, how would you use conditioning games to achieve that, to kind of get both rugby and the conditioning element out of it?
Yeah, in terms of conditioning games, I think the biggest thing is just discussion and constant feedback to coaches. I don't think there's a perfect plan, but I mean, once if you keep talking to the coaches around, look, what do they want, what do we want, especially say for example in pre-season, we can help as S&C coaches try to implement some rules of intensity. Look, pre-season example, it's kind of an easy one to provide. It's a game of drop off touch, and that increases some running intensity, and then but again on the other side of it, the tactical or technical aspect, that creates more space in the defensive line, so it helps players identify space and challenges their decision making, and also when coaches can review footage, they can look at how players realign a defence under high fatigue. So there's dual benefit across coaches and S&C, and then in season, similar concepts. It's just discussion with coaches. It's probably less conditioning games for the match day squad, but more so around conversation or challenge with coaches. Can we increase the intensity of this drill to make sure that it's at or above the intensity of the match, or those worst case scenario passages in the match, and then just being very conscious of dose. So probably trying to identify a couple of drills within a session, and say really going for those physically, while still maintaining the kind of technical tactical challenge as well.
Just on that note, I know some clubs have kind of used different drills and then almost looked at the kind of GPS data on that, and then they've kind of got a bank of different drills, knowing roughly what kind of GPS response they'll have from it. Is that something you've done and kind of use that to guide what games you use?
Yeah, the drill banking is something that, or drill library, whatever term you want to use for it, it's something that I've used, and I'm currently using. I think like it's a guide. It's drills change from time to time, depending on the session focus, the opposition, everything else. So they're always going to be a guide. But I think they can be definitely useful in conversation with coaches. So when they're planning out sessions, are the physical outputs aligned to the technical focus or the tactical focus for the session or for the week. So whilst it's never going to plan the entire session, unless it was a conditioning session, if for a sports session, a rugby or football session, I think it can definitely help in the conversation. So for example, if a coach is targeting a certain tactical session and they wanted to do these 6 different drills, but then if you have some information regarding the physical output of that drill or those 6 drills, you can help and say, oh look, these drills are all stressing the same physical quality, or they're stressing something different. Could we think about doing something else or adding in this rule of intensity? And then it's sort of like a discussion or a negotiation around, okay, what the coach feels is the best thing for them, and then also then I guess from an S&C coach you're trying to input what the best thing for the player is in terms of feeling prepared but also feeling fresh for that week's competition.
Now we've kind of mentioned high speed running a bit earlier. Now when looking at high speed running in rugby, what have you found kind of is important as I guess a kind of performance measure, and how does that impact your training approaches?
Yeah, to be honest, personally anyway, my focus went from high-speed running volume to more of a focus around efforts. That's not to say that high-speed running volume isn't important, and you can consider it for management and whatever else. But for me, from a variety of things, discussions, some work I'm doing at the moment, exploring and conversations, and I guess anecdotally as well, that the efforts just seem to be more representative of effort or intent in rugby, and not just high speed running efforts, but also acceleration, deceleration, and collision efforts. Just in my experience, I seem to have better discussions with coaches around, the efforts seem to better represent or was better aligned to what they kind of felt in the session, and the actions seem to resonate with players a little bit better. So look, you can argue that the detail or whatever around the connections between efforts and sporting actions, but some of the stuff that I've explored and the conversations I've had, players seem to resonate with that. So for example, an acceleration effort for them, they might have considered that as an effort to get off the line in defence. So that's a really clear connection for them. A high speed running effort might be a kick chase effort. So again, really clear, really easy kind of relatability between the player and the kind of discussions that we were having. So yeah, probably more of a shift towards that, and some of the discussions and work that I've done is looking, and the coaches have said this as well, around the higher the competition level, the less space you seem to have. So it's probably more important to consider what you do in that smaller space. So that's where distance becomes potentially a little bit less important, but more so the efforts within that distance.
Yeah, that's interesting. And again, on high speed running, how have you found, probably more in terms of in training as opposed to games, but how have you found the kind of sweet spot in terms of improving performance, but also injury prevention? That kind of inverted U of getting enough running in that's going to improve performance and prevent injury, but not too much that it kind of increases their injury risk.
Look, I don't think anybody's found the perfect sweet spot of high speed running. That inverted U, I think, look, a lot of that is like common sense. You don't do too little, you don't do too much. In terms of looking at high speed running volume only, I think that has some pretty big limitations, because it lacks some context. So that the example I think about, which is hopefully clear, is if you compare high speed running volumes from a linear running sessions, so tempo running, MAS interval running, you get quite a high volume of output in terms of high speed running. Compare that to sport training or certain drills, your high speed running volume might be much lower, but how you accumulate the running is very, very different. Now look, I'm obviously biased. I wrote a paper on high speed running density is the term that I've used, and it's I guess for me and for some of our work previously, it provided some context around the distance that was accumulated. But yeah, certainly I'm a little biased in that area. But in terms of injury prevention or performance, I think like the biggest thing for me personally anyway was preparedness equals protection in some capacity. So if you try prepare your players for the most demanding passages of play or the toughest periods in the game, and then hopefully that offers them some protection against that.
Yeah, so you're talking like your kind of worst case scenario type things. How have you trained for those?
Yeah, in terms of worst case scenario, did some research with Dan and Killian Reardon, who's still at Leinster, looking at like the longest passes of play and the most intense ones in games, and then that definitely helped, I guess, progress our training intensity. So it would have been a discussion with coaches around, look, in certain drills, can we increase the intensity, or can we challenge and stress players physically, but also, I guess, technically under high fatigue. So instead of blowing the whistle after a mistake, can we challenge them? Can we get them to exert really high physical output? So whether that's a run across a pitch or a different transition or a turnover, and that, I guess, implemented or caused some chaos and some stress on players. So that can be quite demanding. So it was trying to get doses of that throughout the week, and then probably an evolution of that went to that Tuesday session that gets a bit of discussion called Tuesdays. After Stuart came over, that Tuesday, we say Tuesday, it was the furthest day away from the match before and the match after, so that ended up being one of our biggest days and our most intense days. And I think the way that we trained ended up having a huge impact on how fit players were, and obviously look, other work outside of that as well. But I mean, you'll hear Stuart talk about how the way in which players train has a huge input and effect on how they play. So I guess to hear that from a coach as well, not just an S&C coach, is quite powerful.
Yeah, that's cool. And this is a question we ask all the guests on the podcast: is what do you think is the biggest mistake rugby players make when it comes to strength and conditioning?
Yeah, I've heard this question, so it's a good one. Look, I was definitely very lucky to work with like a brilliant squad of players, like young and old, who were like so driven that like they would run through like that phrase, run through a brick wall for you if they felt it was going to benefit their performance. So I think it's not necessarily a mistake, but it's probably to be patient and develop some consistency. I think if a player wants to get fitter, they ask you to do one fitness session and potentially think that's going to get them fitter, but it's actually there's probably no quick fixes in that world. It's more around, okay, can I create some good habits around training, conditioning, nutrition or recovery? Can I improve my behaviors around those areas? Can I do those conditioning sessions or top ups consistently? And that's the thing that's going to get me fitter, as opposed to the once off. So probably more around that. It's not necessarily a mistake, but
yeah, definitely, that's great. And kind of enjoying the process, I guess, and focusing on that as opposed to rather than just looking at those quick outcomes. Good, real good point. Now, a lot of clubs use cat movement jump, vertical jump, whatever, for various reasons. How have you found it to be useful?
Yeah, look, I've gone to and fro using CMJ for monitoring or any sort of jump testing for monitoring. Previously used CMJ and an Opta jump, but I guess I question jump height being a measure that's sensitive enough to detect any sort of fatigue from a monitoring perspective anyway. Not to say that's for like a testing perspective, but we also tried some RSI, but I think one of the key things is compliance, and trying to, especially a drop jump was quite a harsh movement. So for us to collect that information in a monitoring window that gave us enough time to act on it, alongside, considering all of the other subjective measures and other objective measures that we were collecting had its difficulties. I think, a kind of room and jump on a force plate, it definitely has opportunity to give us some more information than just jump height. Again, I think for me and maybe everybody on others will definitely know more than I will in terms of force plate data, but I think we're still trying to learn what the best variable is from that. So but I definitely see value in it. I think one of the things that players and coaches want is a really quick sort of well, is that good or what's that like? But I think sometimes with monitoring specifically, you need to collect a couple of months of data before you can get a true baseline for players, and you can start to make some good inferences then. But obviously players want, after one session, they want the change or the response from it. I know Matt Jordan in Canada has done some really, really good data collection on monitoring, so he'd probably be somebody to go to for more detail and stuff like that on that.
What about using it to kind of not predict, well, I guess predict kind of improvements in other performances, as opposed to just monitoring?
Yeah, look, in terms of not in terms of predicting, but at the moment in work, we're using a kind of room jump as a measure of eccentric strength, or we've termed it braking strength. So look, one of the benefits of that is that you can get a really good measure of a player's strength and jump capability. It's extremely feasible. And really low fatigue from the test and low time, so it's definitely a really good one in my opinion, and it gives you some insight into eccentric and concentric variables. So I think it actually offers a bit more than, say, potentially a 2 times body weight squat, for example. So I think it also gives you or allows you to rely less on one exercise for strength development. So you can I suppose lean away or stray away and use a variety of different exercises or solutions or strategies with different individuals, but then have a consistent testing protocol that all your athletes can actually do. So whether that's a kind of room jump or drop jump, drop land, even an isometric type exercise with a force plate. So I think that's certainly the way forward in my opinion.
Now I know you've done a bit of work on optimal loading for sled work and stuff. Can you talk to us a bit about that? What you found?
Yeah, look, I'm probably going to get bashed for using the word optimal, or I'll definitely get challenged for it. And I don't, it's difficult to say optimal because optimal for what? But anyway, I think just got quite curious about resisted sleds a couple of years ago. And look, we've used in practice that we've loaded sled loads, percentage body weight relative to players, and then just saw some limitations in practice. That the percentage body weight doesn't account for strength levels of athletes, acceleration or sprint ability, and direction of force application, technical, everything else. So I found it very difficult to keep using that. We did try some velocity decrement measures as well, and look, all methods have their practical limitations, but the momentum in Rugby 1 sort of just clicked one day. It did a bit of reading, and there's a bit of research in rugby around momentum and being able to determine between higher and lower level players, not from a resisted sled perspective, but from an absolute max or peak momentum. So then, look, momentum from a physics point of view is literally mass times velocity. So from a sled perspective, it gave us a method of an actual output, a score, and it allowed us to try strike the right balance between mass and velocity. Look, I did some pilot testing as well, which was fun to do. But we got to a point where we were happy with the sort of, I guess, the application of the method we were going to use and everything else, in terms of session flow and that type of thing. So we we developed a momentum profile for players where we looked at, what momentum were players achieving at various different loads across 10 meters. We were just focusing on a shorter sort of distance, and we found like the load that maximized momentum relative to body weight varied from as low as 20-30% all the way up to 70-80%. So to me, if you used a 30% body weight sled load across all of your players, it just doesn't make sense in my head. So then we started doing some more digging, tried to relate their momentum profile from resisted sleds to their max velocity or max, I guess, unresisted body weight momentum. Found some like nearly perfect correlations there. So I don't necessarily, you can't assume that the sled is going to have an influence on top speed, but in my opinion, it's giving some measure of their horizontal capability or sprint capacity in some way. We obviously still need to do a bit more work in that area. But then I guess we then try to look at, trying to relate it to carry performance as well in rugby. And look, it's never going to explain all the variants of carry performance, but it definitely was related in some way and had some impact on a player's carry effectiveness. And you hear players all the time speaking about finding the right weight to play at. I've definitely heard some players and seen some articles and stuff around players being interviewed. And I'm obviously biased because I've done some work and I've been interested in the area, but I effectively think they're speaking about momentum. So what's the weight that how heavy can I be whilst I can still maintain, still run around the park, still run quickly. Some momentum from a sled's point of view, but also from an unresisted perspective makes a lot of sense to me in that, it can help with discussions and feedback. So a really, really basic example would be, if a player is trying to put on some body weight or lose some body weight, we want to know, okay, does that have an influence on their output? So if you can give them feedback in terms of momentum, okay, they may have lost some weight, but potentially their velocity increases so that their momentum goes up. And that's, in that circumstance, that could be seen as a positive instead of, potentially just looking at body weight going, oh, this player's lost weight, he needs to put weight back on. So really, really kind of simple, I guess, insight and discussion and something to help a conversation with a player and a coach, I think.
Yeah, definitely. That's interesting. I know Dan used sleds a lot, and obviously the better you can prescribe it, the better results you get. And also, I agree with you in that, like, some players can be a bit funny about, losing weight often on one for some of the bigger ball carriers. They think they're going to lose that momentum, but if you can kind of explain, why you're trying to do it, and that they'll increase their velocity, so they'll maintain the momentum. It helps that way as well. So that's interesting points. Now, obviously, in this day and age, there's tons of data we can gather from GPS and monitoring and things like that. But maybe at some clubs I've seen where there's so much data that it all just gets kind of locked away and not used. So what's your kind of approach to kind of gather the data and then actually find out what affects the performance, and then how you use that to sort of to affect your training?
I think one of the key things for me is just consistency, and that's across the board, whether that's with GPS data, wellness, rugby, sport data, anything. It's just be consistent. I think one thing with tech now and probably some data processing and the skills of a lot of S&C coaches now is that you can start broad with your data collection, and you can explore things of interest, or you can explore the relevance of things in the background. It may not be something you report on immediately, but you can work away with and then have some conversations outside of feedback from training or session reports. So I think that's definitely one thing. But for me, it's definitely key to relate everything to the game. Trying to create a connection to the sport, translate some information for coaches and players to understand, and with that, obviously there comes some education alongside it as well. You want to try have a positive influence on the program, not to say you want to control the program, but can you help the program improve the performance of players? And that's probably the question that I'd ask all the time. So one of the things, look, when I reflect back to Leinster, one of the things we tried to do was relate the distance that players covered to their involvement in the game, to try to see, okay, was the measure of intensity, for example, distance covered, was that actually reflective of anything in rugby? Certainly not saying, it's a measure of performance, or you're not going to rate someone's performance on any sort of GPS metric, but if we can get you to a place where physically you can cover more distance, or you can get into positions to express yourself from a sporting perspective and to get involved in the game, I think that gives coaches and players a lot. Okay, well, this is relevant. It's not to say it has to dictate everything. It's not going to be a measure of how well you performed, but in the data that we collected, it was, okay, if a player can get, if they can cover more distance in a non-contact scenario, potentially gives them opportunity to get more involved in the game, and then it's up to the coaches and the technical staff to make sure that how they express themselves in those involvements, the tackles, carries, are positive after that. And then another thing with data and everything else, I think it's just discussion and feedback from coaches and players. I think their response alongside your data processes or any sort of change you make in their program is important. I think you need to seek people outside of your own department or potentially your own biases for a challenge and critique, and they may offer an opinion that you haven't thought of, and then you could go, oh, actually, I didn't even think of that, or I didn't even consider that. So, and then you can go from there and start collecting some data with a different lens in your analysis, and that's sort of an avenue, I guess. So I think, a lot of it, it's, I guess, to sum up, is the consistency, but relating to the game, and then the discussion with coaches and players.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, it's all the stuff is a tool to improve the performance. It's finding ways that can impact that, but like I said, first you need that buy-in. So relating it to the game and the way you're trying to play will, that'll get the buy-in from the players and the coaches. So is there any other ways other than kind of relating it to the game you've kind of tried to get more buy-in with it?
Yeah, in terms of other ways to get buy-in, a lot of it's just more conversations, I think, and I think I kind of alluded to this earlier on, was, if often, with me personally anyway, when people ask me questions, it tends to join some dots together, or, make me think in a different way. So, I've had players have asked me, could you compare this to that? And why don't you do it like this? And I'm then, I actually never thought of it like that. So, I've adopted some things, tweaked some ways of working, definitely off the back of some conversations with players. I don't even know if this will answer your kind of buy-in question, but in my experience, I had an example of a player who he wanted some feedback from a series of games. So I got it, and I said, look, which of these out of interest did you find most difficult? So this is before he'd seen any feedback, and he said, it was these two, definitely. I found these really challenging physically. So then we looked at a couple of different variables across them, and there were one or two that were clearly different in that game versus other ones. And he was like, that fits in with his, feeling. And this was before he'd seen the information, which is good. And then look, I guess off the back of that, you can start to use that, firstly the conversation, but secondly the data you have to help, I guess, if he has any additional opportunity for conditioning throughout a week or in the season, you can gear your conditioning towards those sort of variables or those qualities that address the things that he finds most difficult or most fatiguing, in the hope that firstly then he, as a player, goes, okay, well this conditioning session is specifically geared towards me because of the conversations I've had, but also the feedback from the information that I got. And then you can give some feedback from that conditioning session, related to the games that he found difficult. So it starts to, I guess, form part of a bigger picture, especially from a data point of view. So that's probably an example of buy-in that I've had, and it wasn't necessarily forced upon a player, but it was that's sort of the process that I went through as one example.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's always like we've got all that data and technology, but it always comes back to the ability to communicate it and get the players to understand it. It's kind of almost useless without that, and that's a good example of showing how you've got the player on board a bit more with it, but also, modified their training to kind of remedy the not issue, but to improve performance. And again, that'll just imagine that'll give me more buy-in, because they're like, well, this is personal to me, and it'll improve my performance. So yeah, it's that's the way to approach it, I'd say. Again, this question we ask all the guests on the podcast is, what advice would you give to an upcoming strength coach?
Yeah, I've heard this one before a few times, and to be honest, I still consider myself like upcoming, or in that I'm still young, so I don't want to give advice, because I feel like I don't like give advice to myself. But look, what I will do, I'll share some of like my own processes, what I'm trying to do, and hopefully that's kind of the same thing, I guess, or similar. But definitely in the last kind of 18 months, I've definitely tried to improve on a couple of things. One of those being self-awareness. So I've read a couple of things, but kind of consciously tried to become a little bit more self-aware, to better reflect on my own processes, whether that's kind of long-term, or even after a session. So if I've delivered something, or if I've given some feedback or had a conversation, trying to create some time to reflect on that. Which obviously, look, you can argue it's difficult to have the time, but I think it's important to do it as well. And then also just seeking clarity from colleagues, or different departments, coaches, even myself, like being clear with what I want to do. I think that's really helped me, I guess, focus my intention towards some clear objectives or clear outlines for the day or for the week or whatever it is. So they've been three things I've focused on, and some of the other, I guess, more general things is I am pretty curious. I'm pretty persistent, so I'm sure they trickle into my work or my thoughts as well, and I've definitely tried to share some thoughts, be open-minded to challenge or different opinions, and just try learn from some of those. And I've definitely, I guess I'm not afraid to try challenge somebody, even if they're higher up. And again, it's not to say, I want to challenge everybody for the sake of it, or rub people up the wrong way. But if I have an opinion, I'm happy to have a conversation. If somebody else has a different opinion, and then hopefully off the back of that, I end up in a better place. And if I'm wrong, I've certainly learned something from being wrong as well. So, and then probably one more that I've really tried to focus on is thinking about how I engage people, and whether that's through delivery or coaching or sessions, presentations. Trying to think on that, and certainly I'm not an expert, but still trying to learn in that regard. Yeah, one of the things as well I've I think I've touched on the last couple of points is when I do share things, I feel like when other people question it, they connect the dots in my head for me. So I see thoughts as dots in my head, and then when people ask questions or people provide their opinion, that helps with the clarity that I have in my own way of thinking or philosophy about something. So I find it a really useful practice to share some stuff.
No, I was just saying all great points, and yeah, I agree. I think I was listening to a podcast the other day where a chap was talking about how he learns, and it doesn't really fully understand something until he kind of teaches someone. So it makes sense with where people are questioning you and you've got to explain it to someone else. It kind of it connects the dots for you more than anything else. So yeah, good points. And any on that note, in terms of like a developing coach, are there any books or resources you recommend? Anything that's kind of made a big impact on you through your career?
Yeah, look, I tend to read books more that I'm interested in. So as opposed to giving any S&C books, there's a few that I've read obviously quite recently, and I think that these are well known and probably everybody has read them in some degree, but Start With Why I found really good. Primal Leadership, Thinking Fast and Slow, and then I'm currently reading Rebel Ideas. So they're quite interesting. And in terms of other, like, books and resources, I really don't think you have to look too hard these days to find some good courses or podcasts or material online, or you don't have to look too hard to find some good people as well. So I think the biggest thing in terms of, like, books and things is you just have to start the book or initiate the conversation or press play in the podcast, and that's pretty much as difficult as it is. That's the hardest part, I guess. But yeah, really don't have to look too far or too hard to find some really, really good resources and people.
Yeah, definitely. And then kind of newish question on the podcast. What should I have asked you that I haven't? Is there anything you think you can help share with the listeners?
What should you have asked is a tough question. I don't know if there's anything that I can really think of, to be honest. If there is any questions that people have, I doubt there will be, but if there is anything, I'm more than happy for people to reach out on, and I'm happy to have a conversation after this. So
yeah, cool. And well, that leads me nicely to my next question: is where can people learn more about you?
I am on Twitter to try share some thoughts and have some conversations there, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. So, but yeah, I'm more than happy to have conversations with people and try to be relatively active on those.
Oh, great. And of course, we'll share links to your Twitter and LinkedIn in the show notes. But just to wrap it up, great talking to you, Peter. Tons of good information there, and really like your philosophy and the fact you're so willing to share. It's great. Some of the stuff on Twitter has been really interesting that I've been following. So keep it up, and thanks very much.
Cheers, Jamie. Thanks for having me. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll agree that was well worth a listen. Thank you very much, Peter, not only for taking the time to talk to us initially, but also to respond with some of the answers. Well, a lot of the answers that we kind of lost because of the Wi-Fi issue. So much appreciated. Some great information, and you put a lot of work into it. So thank you for that, and all the best for the future with the FA. In the meantime, guys, please subscribe to us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, Spotify, whatever you use for your podcasts, and of course give us a 5-star review, and keep checking us out at rugbyrenegade.com and the social media channels. More podcasts to come. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.